Welcome everybody to another Pauper video. So the Grixis Affinity video I made a couple of days ago did really well, and a lot of you had things to say in the comments, which I appreciated. Even the people who told me I was wrong, I think that's really important. So today I want to do something similar but go a little bit wider. I want to talk about cards that feel too strong for Pauper. And I need to be really clear here about the word feel, because I know how these videos usually go. This is not a ban list video. I'm not calling for any of these cards to be banned. What I'm curious about instead is the gap between what a common card it's supposed to be and what some of these cards actually do in Pauper, and what that gap does to the format when you're sitting across from it. Some of these cards I even want to actively keep. One or two of them I would probably ban if I could, with some caveats. Most of them are somewhere in between though. Let's go. We are starting with the one I think is the most balanced, which is maybe a weird place to start, but I want to set a tone here. A card can be way above the power level of a normal common and still be good for the format. So let's talk about Writhing Chrysalis. It's a 4-mana creature with 2 Gruul pips and it's a 2/3 with reach. That doesn't really sound scary on its own. When you cast it, you get 2 Eldrazi spawns though, and every time you sacrifice an Eldrazi, it can be any Eldrazi, it grows by a +1/+1 counter. So you sacrifice both spawns for 2 mana, and now it's a 4/5, and that's the actual card, 4 mana for a 4/5 with reach, and it paid you 2 mana back on the way there, right? And the reach matters a lot, by the way, because this format is full of flyers, Sneaky Snacker, Refurbished Familiar, Core Skyfisher, Glintehawk, and many more. And here is what makes it genuinely hard to answer. The spawns come from a cast trigger, not an ETB trigger, so counterspelling it doesn't go 1/1, they still get the tokens. Removal doesn't go 1/1 either, because the tokens are there on the board already. And because of Devoid, it's colorless, despite having a red pip, so Hydroblast and Blue Elemental Blast can't really do anything about it. There is almost nothing in the format that just cleanly trades with this card 1/1. It's also both a ramp payoff and a ramp piece, which is a really unusual thing for one card to be, especially in Pauper, and it gets really absurd in multiples or alongside cards like the Eldrazi Repurposer or Malevolent Rumble, because those cards create more Eldrazi spawns. So why do I actually like the card? It is because the format is aggressive, and this is the card that actually lets you stabilize. It makes a lot of blockers, it makes a big body, it blanks flying damage. It's a necessary evil, I feel like, and honestly right now I think it's very healthy for the format. What I don't love about the card though is the splash pressure, right? This card is kind of warping the deck building in multiple ways, so Boros Bully, for example, which is suggested by the name of Boros deck, is nowadays splashing green for Writhing Chrysalis. Combo decks like Teamer Cam and Chant Pilipala get a whole midrange plan out of this card with just 4 copies of Writhing Chrysalis. And when one common is carrying multiple archetypes and bending just mana bases to fit it in, I think that's definitely worth noticing, and that's true even if the card itself is fine. Where it genuinely gets too much are ramp decks, like Gruul Ramp in my opinion, where it can land on turn 2 or turn 3, and it snowballs way too well from there. My verdict is, I think this is the card I would want to keep the most in the format, although it is really strong. Now this one is a great example of Modern Horizons 3 power creep, and I don't think anyone at Wizards saw this coming. Sneaky Snacker is a 2/1 flyer with a blue-black mana cost. It's a dimmer fairy, and it is mostly played in mono-red burn decks. Let that sit for a second, because I actually think it's really funny. Red decks are playing a blue-black card they literally can't cast. Not cheaply, they can't cast it at all. They just discard it to something like Grab the Prize or any other discard 1, draw 2, and then when they draw their 3rd card in a turn, it walks back right onto the battlefield on its own. So basically it's a free 2-power flyer that provides real pressure because the 2/1 body is really strong, as we know from Refurbished Familiar, and it's off of a card they were throwing away anyway, discarding. And here is the part that actually bothers me. To deal with it permanently, you have to not only remove it, but also exile it from the graveyard, because removal that exiles is very scarce in Pauper. So you need to spend 2 cards, make 2 game actions for a creature they never even cast and never paid a single mana for. That's why you now need Graveyard Hate against burn decks, which is really weird to me. And you could say, well, Mono-Red Madness plays Lava Dart and Fateless Looting anyway, but think about this. I think that if Sneaky Snacker never existed, I'm not sure Mono-Red Madness would exist as well. And this card genuinely changed how the format sideboards against burn and how do we think about what red decks even are. Safe to say, Sneaky Snacker is excellent in dimmer decks as well, where I think it actually belongs, and I have no problem with it there. It is strong in Dimmer Terror, though funnily enough, I don't think it's Sneaky Snacker that makes the deck strong, which brings us to the next one. I would say the Verdict, it is one of the 2 cards I wouldn't miss in the format. So this is the obvious one, and I want to explain why banning it wouldn't actually fix anything. So in a dedicated deck, Tolarian Terror hits the board on turn 3, usually, but the 5/5 body is not really the big problem. I think the problem is the ward too. So if you think about the math, right, the average removal spell that kills this thing costs about 2 mana, let's say Cast Down for example. We could use Snuff Out as an example, but not everybody is playing that card. So on turn 3 or 4 you need the removal spell, and you also need 2 extra mana, and this is the exact point in the game where you also need to be finding your lands, drawing your cards and developing your board. And very often you just can't, because the snake is going to kill you. So it's not like you can't answer this card, you can answer it, just later than you can afford very often. But I don't think this card should ever be banned, because you would remove an archetype that a lot of people actually love playing, and that's a very real cost. If we ever did want to tune the deck down a little bit, and right now I don't think we need to, given everything else in the format, the smarter target is probably something like Mental Note. This would leave the archetype intact, it would just reduce how consistently Tolarian Terror shows up on turn 3. It would push the deck towards being more of a control shell, maybe Dimmer Terror being the premier option again. And here is the design point I find really interesting. If we compare Tolarian Terror to Cryptic Serpent. Cryptic Serpent costs more upfront because of its pips, and it also has no protection. And I think that's how you make this kind of card without breaking anything. You give it a real mana floor and you don't staple on any protection. And Terror is 1 mana with Ward 2, and this combination is basically the whole story. What's true though is, at least with Tolarian Terror you can go 1 for 1 eventually, which is more than I can say for the next card. My verdict is that this card is really strong, but banning it right now would cost more than it fixes. Okay, I think this card is my number 1. Refurbished Familiar is a 2/1 flyer with affinity for artifacts, and when it enters, each opponent discards a card, and if they can't, you draw 1 card instead. The printed cost is 4 mana, but you basically never pay more than 2, and very often, I mean very often, it's only a single black mana. So let's be generous for now, and say this card costs 2. For 2 mana, you get an evasive body that provides a clock, a very good one I would say. A 2/1 is a pretty solid clock, especially in the air, right? And you strip a card from their hand. They have to deal with a creature, and they have already lost a card. That's a 2 for 1 before you've even done anything clever, right? But it stacks up worse than that. Its mana value is 4, so Spellstarter's Pride has a really hard time of countering it. Casting removal on it is another 2 for 1 for them, because they already got the discard, and almost every deck playing it also plays Blood Fountain, so it comes back and you go through that 2 for 1 loop yet again, meaning you are also expected to exile their graveyard while you're at it, and that's an enormous amount of format tax for a single common. And also, the CMC is 4, so Reckoner's Bargain gives you 4 life, of course that's true mostly for Affinity. If we compare it to something similar, and the closest card is Virus Beetle, which is the closest thing we have to refurb, Familiar just has more power, it flies, it draws a card when their hand is empty, and it has a lower mana floor, and every single axis of this card is just better than the closest best thing. And when this costs 1, which happens pretty often, a 1 mana 2/1 flyer would already be a totally reasonable Pauper card on its own, but when we attach this card to that, it's just completely broken, there is no other word. So yeah, on rate alone, this is my ban contender, but I want to be honest here, I've thought less about what removing it would actually do to the format than about how unreasonable the card actually is, and those are two different questions. My verdict is that this is the card I would most likely ban, with some caveats. Now, here is the one where I'm going to argue for the card, and the reasoning is a little bit different. So in a creature-based deck, Winding Way is 2 mana, draw 2 to 4. Very often you draw 3 to 4, especially in decks like Spy, where you play 40 plus creatures. And even the low roll 2 mana draw 2 is completely okay still, right? Lead the Stampede sees 1 more card, but it costs 1 more mana, so the average on Winding Way is simply better, but of course in these creature decks you end up playing both of them. It is a pretty absurd rate on average, so why am I okay with this? Because everything else in this video exists, mono green needs a reason to show up, and this is it. I think Elves and Spy, even though Spy is not mono green, it has a mono green core, I would say. They get the draw engine strong enough that one of these spells just unmulligans you and refills your hand entirely, and that's what keeps those decks very competitive against the stuff we just talked about, right? So my position on this one is conditional. Winding Way is fine as long as the format around it stays this powerful. If Refurbished Familiar and Sneaky Snacker went away, this is exactly the card you would need to take a look at next, or Elves and Spy would just inherit the format. My verdict is that this card is fine now, but it is one of the first things to re-examine later if anything gets banned and the format changes. And at last, let's talk about the mechanics in Pauper, because I keep hearing people argue about these. The honest truth is these are the most polarizing effects Pauper has to offer, because if you stick Monarch or the initiative and hold it for the rest of the game, you are very likely winning that game. Genuinely, right? If an emblem lands and you have no way to take it back, that's often a conceit. That's how strong they are. I think the reason they get overlooked is that they are very binary. So against decks with a lot of cheap creatures like fairies, like White Weenie, like Red Rally, you almost never hold them, so people don't even cast them. And against decks that don't pressure the board, like the hardcore Dimmer Control with Bonder's Ornament or generally Gardens, they can just win on the spot. So we have to think about the fact that those decks very often just end up playing emblems defensively, not because they actively want them, but so that the opponent can't have them first and hold them for the rest of the game. In control decks, I actually think they're fine. It's a win condition for an archetype that isn't especially popular right now, and it punishes other control decks, which is pretty healthy, I would say. Where they bother me is ramp. Gruul Ramp or Elves can land an Avenging Hunter on turn 3, and if you don't steal it immediately, it snowballs very well, and stealing it is already difficult in the first place, because those decks already have other good creatures blocking for it by then. And if you're the control deck, you can be winning the board for 10 turns straight and then just die to the trap from the initiative dungeon. That feels really bad in a way that's hard to argue with for the control decks, right? The verdict is, these cards are fine now, but they are on the watch list if anything else gets touched. So I'm not calling for a ban on any of these cards right now. I want to say that clearly one more time, because I know how it reads when you spend 15 minutes listing powerful cards from Pauper. Would I miss Refurbished Familiar or Sneaky Snacker? No, I definitely wouldn't. Would I ban them tomorrow? And no, I wouldn't ban them tomorrow because it is never that simple. You often nerf one archetype and you just crown the next strongest one, and now you're in a chain reaction where every fix creates the next problem, right? We are probably never getting a perfectly balanced format, that's not a real thing, but I do think there's a coherent choice here and it's basically all or nothing. So either we let the format breathe and we accept the newfound power level, or we can get a lot of singleton cards at once and actually rebalance the top decks together. What doesn't work is picking off cards one by one and hoping it will work. And I will admit my bias, I am saying this as a brewer. It has become really hard to build something that can hang on with the top decks. People say Pauper has tons of brews, and I don't think that's quite true, because most of what actually wins and gets called a brew is a meta deck with a bit of a spin on it, which is okay by me, but it's not the same thing. Do you agree with any of this, or do you think I'm being a little bit dramatic about cards that are just okay? Would you ban anything, and if you would, what do you think would happen to the format the day after the ban would happen? Let me know below, like and subscribe, I will see you soon. Have a great one, and bye.